Why think it over? The future is called.
Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to the video. My name is Darius and I go by the stage name Bunnem. I recently released a track which was a remix of the song While You Think It Over, and I thought it would be really cool to show you guys how the track was made. I'm going to be talking about how I built the track from scratch, how I produced it, and a bit about how I mixed it as well. I hope you guys enjoy it.
Why think it over?
So this is basically what the entire project looks like. It's a pretty heavy project if you look at it. There's a lot of things going on, especially during the drop. There are a bunch of things going on, so if I have to minimize everything, this is basically how the entire project looks like. Quite heavy. So I'm going to try and break it down. Like you can see, I have markers over here on top, so I'm going to try and break it down as easily as possible. Probably run through each important element as far as possible. Let's get straight into it. So let's start off with the intro. For those of you who haven't yet heard the song, this is what the intro sounds like. So at the intro, we have the main part of the intro is these four things, basically these three samples and this intro stab that I made in a plugin called as Serum. I'll just tell you about the stabs first. There's not a lot of thing going on in the stabs, no processing at all. It's just a orchestral hit. Then there is this growl, another orchestral hit, and then there is this growl at the start along with. It's like a brass stab, which is almost like a growl. And then there's a similar glissando slide thing going on in Serum. So yeah, this is what Serum looks like for those of you who don't know. If I have to just play the slide part, that's what it sounds like. Now there are a bunch of effects, pre-entered within the synth itself. Without all of that, this is how it sounds. Pretty dead. So with a bunch of these effects, much better. And then obviously there is a bit of processing going on. So if we look at the channel rack, mixer rack, there are two EQs. One is for just cutting out some of the low end frequency, and then I tend to use two EQs as we go throughout the song. You'll tend to notice that I have usually two EQs on each of the mixer racks. One is to just cut out the unwanted frequencies, and then the other one is just to slightly boost or change the tone of the sound. Then there's a CLA2A, one of my favorite compressors, and a built-in stock reverb of FL Studio, which is a really good reverb which has its own characteristic. With the processing, this is what it sounds like. So without the processing, with the processing turned on, that's what it sounds like. A lot of difference in the overall sound. And then when played together, along with that, there's this piano up that's going on continuously. In fact, it starts from the intro and goes all along the verse up to the pre-chorus. It's a pretty simple app if I play it for you guys. Pretty simple app, nothing much going on over there. If you look at the processing chain, that's basically where everything is. So again, there are two EQs. One is to cut out all of the low end frequencies. Basically, I cut everything below 200 Hz because you don't need any bass frequencies. You're not playing chords or anything. I didn't need the bass frequencies. And then over here, boosting a bit of the low mids and getting rid of the sub frequencies again. Then again, a CLA2A. Then the main plugin for the piano app, what actually gives it the character in the song, is this plugin by Isotope, which is called Isotope Vinyl. Basically what it does is it tries to emulate what would happen when you play a sample out of a vinyl. vinyls are not really straight, they wobble, and as they wobble they tend to add a little bit of disturbance. There would be dust on it, so that would create static sound, and the wobble would tend to change the tempo a bit and the pitch a bit of the song. So that is basically what this plugin does. It makes whatever sample you have sound a little old and vintage. So I'll quickly show you what it sounds with the entire processing chain, and then without the processing chain. If you hear the piano sound closely, there's a slight bit of detunement going on in between at certain places. Now, basically what's happening is this plugin is just slightly putting it a bit off so that it tends to give it that pitch change that I was talking about, and that pitch change happens with this warp slider. I'll show you what happens when you increase it. So that's basically what it does. It tends to give it that wobble effect, and you don't want to overuse it because then it sounds really bad. Obviously, if it's a sound you want to go for, by all means, but that's not what I was looking at. And then I added a little bit of noise to it, so it again adds to the overall oldness of the piano. That's even a word. So yeah, I mean that's basically it for the piano, and I didn't want it to sound too digital, so that's why I added all of these. Then there's a virtual mix rack by Slate Digital, which I use just to add another EQ to boost up the high shelves. And then obviously there's a compressor. And then along with all of that, there are these two things which make up the intro and the verse of the track. One is this sample which came along with the original stems, which is like a nice bass flute, kind of a very airy sound. It basically fills up the atmosphere, and adding a bit of automation to it just to get the desired result I was looking for, kind of swell it, and I didn't want it to come in directly. So just a bit of volume automation and nothing else. Along with that, there are these pads which I programmed originally and then had to bounce them because the project was getting too heavy, so I had to go ahead and bounce a bunch of the MIDI files into WAV files so that I could use them and mix them in the project. As we go on the project, you'll see a lot of MIDI files being bounced to WAV files. WAV files don't tend to take up as much CPU as a MIDI file, because a MIDI file is triggering the third-party synth plugin that you're using, and that tends to use up a lot of CPU. So imagine 50 different plugins. It's just like probably turning all the appliances on at your house, at your place. That will put a lot of stress on the electricity box. And yeah, so this is what that pad sounds like. Again, if you listen to the original song, that pad is not really noticeable. It's just there to fill it up. What's more noticeable is the above space flute that was the original sample.
Maybe it's not.
So this part is what gives it that gradual increase in the intro. Makes the transitioning to the vocals a little more seamless and enjoyable. So yeah, that was it about the intro into the verse. And then the verse doesn't have a lot of things going on. It just has, we'll come to the vocals in a bit. We have the bass obviously going on in the verse, but again, not a lot of things going on in the bass. Just 3 layers. One is like this plucky wobble bass, then a Reese bass, and then there is this sub bass which probably if you're listening through phone speakers or laptop speakers you may not be able to hear it, so I'd recommend if you use earphones or headphones or something. Yeah, so that was it from the bass. There's nothing much going on in the bass, just single note, the root note of every chord that's coming in. And then now let's go on to the vocals. Now if you look at the vocals, there are a bunch of layers, especially during the pre-chorus. Even during the riser, I used a few samples. Now these look like, one sample, but that wasn't the case. From the original sample, what I did was I went and chopped off, if you see these yellow markers, these are basically where the sample was chopped off. and then I consolidated everything to one sample so it's easier to work with. Coming to the verse, this is the original, what the original vocal sounds like, which came in the original stems.
Maybe it's not the wind throwing you off your feet again. Could it be that the odds of your...
And there's nothing wrong with this texture, but that's not what I wanted. I wanted something a little more airy and breathy sounding. Ideally, you would want to do that in the recording itself. You would want to ask the singer to, get that texture. However, if I show you my mixer rack, you'll see a ton of plugins on that, and that was basically to get that airy sound, which is possible if the vocals are recorded properly. Like this vocal was recorded really well, so I could go around and play around with it and manipulate it the way I wanted it. So if I just put on the plugins on my vocal channel,
Maybe it's not the wind throwing you off your feet again.
so that's what it sounds like with all of these plugins turned on. Now, as you saw it was eating up my CPU, and that's because of how heavy most of these plugins are. I'll probably quickly run through what each of these plugins are doing. As you can see, again, there are two EQs. One is just cutting out a bunch of the lower frequencies, unwanted frequencies. And then I tend to use this API 560, which is a model of the API series plugin EQs by Wave. Wave tends to have good emulation of these analog plugins. The API series of EQs is like one of my favorite EQs, especially due to the bell cuts it has. Then there's this virtual mix rack to increase the air. Air is basically just increasing the higher frequencies, giving it a high shelf, which gives it a slight bit of sparkle and presence, if that makes any sense. Another plugin is this plugin by Isotope again, which is like the name says, it controls the breath of the vocals. The sounds that come when you breathe in, you exhale or inhale while you're singing. This tends to control that a bit. It doesn't take it off. I mean, you can take it off, but then the vocals sound shit, so you don't want to overdo it. Just control it a little bit. Then again, a CLA2A, which is one of my favorite compressors. And then this is the main plugin that is changing the overall texture of the vocals. It's as good as an EQ, but having its own color and character to it. Now, if you see each of these, EQ sliders have a number here. Now these tend to change the curve a bit. Each of them have a different slope, and that affects the overall, result that you're going to get out of this plugin. And then there's this tape saturation by Slate Digital, which gives a bit of analog saturation. Tape machines were used essentially for getting saturation. Tape machines were nothing but recording devices. Nowadays we record it digitally, but in the 60s and 50s there were tapes used. And then again an EQ to color the sound a little bit more. And then after that there is this EQ by Maniam. This is again by Waves. So that was it from the vocal chain. The other vocal layer that's there over here is basically the original vocal already processed basically. So if you listen to it.
It's not the wind throwing you off your feet again.
So that coupled with the dry vocal that I processed separately gives it a nice bit of depth and thickness. So that was it from the vocals. Now in the verse there is nothing else going on. It's just pretty much pads, the original flute sample and the piano up. The pre-chorus is when we see a first instance of some sort of rhythm coming in the form of claps and snaps. So if you listen to the original track,
the future is calling. You don't have to feel brave.
So this is where the percussion comes in for the first time to give it a sense of rhythm. As you know, you're progressing to the drop. I kept it pretty simple with just a snap and a clap layered one on top of the other. So this is a clap and then a snap, finger snap. Again, there's not a lot of processing going on, just an EQ compressor and that's it. And again over here what I did was, rather than processing this separately, I just routed this to the snap channel. It didn't need a lot of processing, I just needed a slight bit of compression and reverb. And this reverb is sent to this large reverb stand, which is again a Mani M reverb, which is a pretty huge reverb with a long decay and everything. If I turn it on, And then with that, apart from that, there are the vocals. The vocals are the main thing that is driving, apart from the snaps and claps, the vocals are what are driving the pre-chorus and giving it a bit of rhythm, because the vocal tends to go a bit up tempo on the pre-chorus. So let's listen to the final master.
The future is calling. You don't have to feel brave.
So as you see, there are a bunch of different vocal layers in the pre-chorus. This is the top line, and then you have 3 harmonies, each panned left, right and center. And 2 of these harmonies were made artificially using Melodyne. So if you listen to the top line and then the artificial harmonies,
the future is calling. You don't have to feel brave.
and if I play the harmony,
the future is calling. You don't have to feel brave.
And then this is just panned left, right.
The future is calling. You don't have to feel brave.
So as you notice, the harmony 2 has a slightly different melody. One is going up, one is going down.
Nice.
In terms of the melody line, and then they're panned to the left and the right. And the harmony 3 is again one of the original stems sent by the original artist. So again, this is pre-processed. This is the way it came, and because it has so much of reverb and everything, it didn't make sense panning it to the left or right. I just kept it in the center because it was already quite wide. There is a lot of processing going on the harmonies. The third harmony has nothing because it was pre-processed, but the harmonies that I made have again an EQ cutting out the lows, then an EQ just boosting up the highs and everything, just getting a bit of compression. Again, these have a send to the reverb send on channel 120. So again, if I play just that,
the future is calling. You don't have to feel brave. Your fortune is constant, but your side tends to sway.
so yeah, basically that's what is going on in the processing chain. So that's it about the pre-chorus, and then we go to the drop. The drop is where everything is happening. The main part of the drop are the vocal chops that you probably heard. I play the vocal chops. On the vocal chop bus, there is a virtual mix rack with, again, just boosting up a little bit of the highs coloring. There's a bit of compression, again, bit of drive, and then shimmer to get the sparkle. Then there's a transient processor. Because the vocal chop tend to peak a lot, the transient processor tends to preserve those peaks without losing any of the loudness and clipping it basic. And then obviously a reverb, because what's a good vocal chop without any reverb? So that was the vocal chop, and the vocal chops are slightly panned left and right to give it a little more bounce. And then obviously there are percussive elements. The first part of the drop is just a simple house beat with the bass kick and the clap. Then there's a hi-hat that comes in after around 8 bars. And then there's a shaker loop after 16 bars. The defining part before the drop is this fill that I made by placing different samples. If you listen to the original song, there is that fill that comes in just before the drop.
Why you think it over? The future.
So that is basically a fill that I personally made myself. I tend to make my own fills and loops and stuff. Now we come to the main part of the drop, which are the drop chords. Now the drop usually will have a melody that's going along with it. For my song, the melody was actually the vocal chop that goes along with the chords. I was sort of almost going to go without the vocal chops, but then I had the idea of putting vocal chops and they sounded really good, so I ended up using them. Now if you see, we have 5 layers of chords, and if I play them together, so that's basically how all of the chord layers sound together. Now if we hear them individually, all of them have a different soundscape and a whole different sound design to them. But when played together, if I go to the processing chain, they all have enough processing going on. To sum it up, basically all of them have an EQ. Camel Crusher is a saturator. Basically saturation overdone is distortion, just thickens the sound. A bit of compression again. There are two compressors used now. One is the 3A, which has a bit of a dark tonal character apart from compression. And I use the FG Grey just to get my, since if I want something to sound a little more centered, a little more tight in terms of the sound, I use the FG Grey. And then there's this plugin called a Chef's Parallel Particle. It's pretty simple to use. Depending on what you want to increase, whether you want to increase the thickness, you just increase the thickness. Whether you want to increase the sub frequencies, you just increase the sub. You want to increase the higher frequencies, you boost up the air function. If you want more presence, you boost up the bite. And it just adds an overall character to your final sound. So if I add it, and then on the second channel again, almost the same processing chain, just an overdrive, then again a 3A. This plugin is called OTT, which stands for over the top compression. OTT, over the top. That's literally what the full form of OTT is. So I used it to boost up the highs, as you can see. I play it. It's cutting out, compressing the bass frequencies a lot, so I get this nice metallic sound. And then for the compression, transient processing, again to preserve the peak and not have it clipping in your mix. And then there's a reverb again. Then again, nothing too different going on here, almost the same processing chain here. With this, the harmonies, because it's a little metallic sounding, I added a vintage exciter. So if I turn on the processing chain on this, and then there are the bass, bass lines and sub bass that's going on again. If you're listening to it on phone speakers, you won't be able to listen to what's going on here. So if I just remove the sub bass, notice how it makes a difference in the sound. So if you're listening to it on earphones or headphones, you'll immediately notice it sounds empty without the sub bass. The sub bass is something that cannot be heard, or you won't be able to pinpoint the sound, but it fills up the entire low end spectrum. It in fact fills up the low end spectrum to a point which humans can't even hear. Obviously it does fit in the frequencies that we hear, but it goes further than that as well, so it tends to fill up the sound completely. So a sub bass is very important, especially in electronic music. So yeah, basically that's the drop. If we go to the break, there are these pads that are going on, which again evolve as you go about. Along with that, I have these synths playing around over here. So yeah, I mean this first synth is just like a wobble synth. It's not multiple notes, it's just single notes. And then again, I made this in Serum. So what's happening here is the cutoff is just routed to the LFO. So it's following this pattern. I just have to press a single note and it does the work. You don't have to press multiple notes or anything like that. Then there is this other arpeggio that's going on. Again, a lot of automations, so use a lot of automations to get good changes over time, and as you're playing and going through your track, you would want it to evolve and not want it to sound too monotonous. This up is something I did not make. It was a preset in Pigments, but yeah, I did tweak a lot of functions in it because this was not originally the way it sounded. There is a filter again evolving, and then there's an automation for the volume. So if you listen to the song and you just listen to this part of the break.
The future is calling. You don't have to feel brave. Your fortune is constant, but your sight tends to sway. The future is cold.
So yeah, it evolves. I mean, like you probably noticed, it's in the back. So not everything has to be in the front. You know, things can stay in the back and still sound good. Some things are just meant to, you know, support the other stuff coming out in front. And then again, there is the bass going on. In the break, again, there's nothing really different going on with the bass. It's just single sub bass lines. One fun fact is this is not following the original chord progression. It is changed up a slight bit. It's contradicting the chord progression. And then just adding the different bass line in the pre-chorus just to, you know, add a different element and not make it sound too monotonous. It sounds like a sub bass, but coupled with the other sounds, it sounds quite different. So that was it from the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to try and do these breakdown videos each time I release a new track. So make sure you subscribe to the channel because there's a lot more good music coming away. See you guys in the next one.
The future is cold.